President Trump at the White House earlier saying that the Defense Production Act is helping states. Meanwhile, Lieutenant General Russel, Honore, a man who has helped lead this nation through one of the most catastrophic events in U.S. history, Hurricane Katrina, had this to say in reaction to the government's response to the coronavirus pandemic. Quote, "It's time to stop BSing around," and the White House. Donald Trump start using the Department of Defense Logistics Command and Control to manage PPE, personal protective equipment. We need to assess our stocks on hand, days of supply on hand for each state. Joining me via Skype is Lieutenant General Russel Honore, who served as the commander of the Joint Task Force Katrina and can always, in my long history and friendship with him, can always be relied upon, General, to say what needs to be said. There is nonsense that is coming out of the White House, not from some state houses. There are a lot of governors who have decided they know what needs to be done, but we have basic logistical issues right now, which is what you went into Katrina to solve. Logistical issues, log jams, things not being where they need to be, supplies not being available, and you use the military's power and authority to fix that. You're saying that's what needs to be done now.
Yeah, news conference kind of explain to people what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, and give the guidance coming out of the White House, which, as we can see, can some days make people feel confident and most days add more questions. But the real solution to a disaster like this epidemic that we are dealing with and pandemic is logistics, Ali. And we have finally gotten FEMA in, who knows how to use the federal logistics system, which normally is backed up by the Defense Logistics Agency, and for days have been recommending through social media and friends that's got contacts in the White House, is to use the Defense Logistics Agency to help manage the PPE. Right now, that's starting to happen through FEMA as states can request PPE, personal protective equipment, through FEMA. But as you heard the president just say, he's also allowed the governors to directly order using federal money that will be reimbursed to them. And he's not going to compete with them. Man, you're talking about your audio and your video not matching. We're going to have PPE flying from California to New York and some flying from Virginia back to California. This is why we have to discipline by creating a total asset visibility of what's in the United States, what's outside the United States, and where is it located, and a centralized ordering system through the federal government so it can be managed and sent to each state. And look, the Defense Logistics Agency has that capacity because inside of logistics, you got to have supply discipline. So every governor is going to empty his checkbook. Or when you hear governors say, we just ordered 2 million, 3 million, 25 million, that means he was the first to that vendor that might have it. And look, the private sector is going to help solve this problem. They will provide those PPE as we need it, as they develop it and as they manufacture it. But we're going to have places that's going to have 5 days of supply, and some with 0 days of supply, and some with 30 days of supply. And that's what the Defense Logistics Agency can help the president with. There was an old Marine general that said, General Barrow, he said, amateurs study tactics and messaging, professionals study logistics.
That's right. And, General, the interesting part is that in response to a question from a reporter about doing it through the federal government as opposed to the governors doing it, because of what you just said, that governors will order as much as they need, but the military can figure out how much New York needs versus Illinois versus Kentucky. The president said the federal government is not a shipping organization. And, in fact, a number of people like you who are familiar with defense logistics and Army Corps of Engineers and the kinds of things that you did in Katrina said exactly the opposite, actually. The federal government the military can organize the supply and movement of this stuff actually better than 50 governors doing this on their own can.
Absolutely, because they're at the whims of what we call disaster capitalism. Every distributor out there is trying to sell their products at the highest price. That's just the system we have. It works, and you're going to pay a little higher for some, but A N95 mask that cost $2 last week, it can be as much as $4, $5, $6, $8 now online, and people are buying them by the thousands, meeting the requirements of those doctors and those nurses because they need them. So up front, we're going to probably pay a little more than we probably need because we've got to get what we need as fast as we can in those hospitals and those first responders.
Yep.
But the system needs to be disciplined, Allie. If we don't discipline, we're going to have a mess on our hand in about 10 days when many areas won't have any supply, Allie.
General, I remember 15 years ago watching when all was going pear-shaped in Katrina, watching you go in there with your cigar, taking control, and there are moments right now where I think maybe that's what America needs. It needs to see someone in charge going in saying, we got this. We'll get you the supplies you need. We'll make sure everybody stays safe. You don't all have to figure out all of this on your own. Right now, we have 330 million people trying to figure out how to behave themselves in a situation that they have never faced before. Lieutenant, thank you for your service to the country. Lieutenant General Russel Honore led the United States Department of Defense response to Hurricane Katrina. Yeah.
Graduate doctors and nurses early. Let them graduate next week and put them in the field, Allie. That's a good idea. We need to get on that and make that happen.
Thank you, sir. Good to see you, sir.